One of my favorite NPR programs is always Stump the Chumps. Click and Clack, the Tappert brothers. They did such a great job talking about cars, but really making people laugh. So every once in a while I like to do, in honor of them, I like to do some question and answer stuff from my YouTube channel. I try really hard to engage with people on my YouTube videos, not just do the videos and then walk away. So these are all questions that I've gotten in the past, I guess about 30 days. So the first one is from Tom, and he asks, which Sony full-frame camera would be the closest in tech to the a6700? Tom's been using an a6700 and he loves it, but he wants to upgrade, and the obvious answer to that question is the a7 IV. He's already got a really new sensor, but it's a crop sensor, and it doesn't let in a lot of light. The larger the sensor, the better the camera is in low light at everything, including autofocus. So by going from the a6700 to the a7 IV, he would get the similar sort of advanced sensor technology that's in both cameras, but he would gain all that extra light that would be coming in that would make the camera much, much easier to focus on things accurately and stuff like that. The next one comes from a person that says, I have the 200 to 600 and people are telling me to always shoot at f8. I would say no, don't do that. Now it does make sense. I tell people all the time to shoot at 6.7. So if you set it at 6.7, then the aperture is not going to change as you zoom from 200 to 600. It's going to stay the same. Therefore, your exposure is going to stay the same. That makes sense, but to go to f8 is not a good idea because you're letting that much less light into the sensor, and that means your focus is going to be a little bit better if you are more wide open. So I do think it's a good idea to shoot at 6.7, but not f8. There's no reason to close down. You're either sharp or you're not with Sony. So somebody named Bakiakim says, I'm sorry, but you really don't know how to present a topic. Thank you for your comment. Okay, next is Cinema Kid asks, is the A9 that much better in autofocus than an a7 III? Oh God, yes. Even though the A9 Classic as we call it now, is old, it's from 2017, if you can imagine. That's like 45 years ago in Sony years. The A9's sensor is so advanced in terms of autofocus. It'll pretty much smoke anything that's an A7 period. So there's not an A7 camera that's been made yet that will autofocus as well as an A9 Classic. Now when you go to the A9 II, that gets better. And of course when you get to A1 and A9 III especially, then it's like otherworldly. How many hours can you record video continuously? This is coming from a camcorder person. But the answer is the same for camcorders as well as the A7, A9, A1 cameras. And that is if you do a big power supply or an AC adapter and you have the largest cards available, or if you're recording with an Atomos recorder, it's really a question of how big is your hard drive. The answer is indefinite for many of the cameras. Some of them would overheat, but the camcorder certainly wouldn't. And so if you're doing external recording and you have an AC power supply, the answer is you can video record continuously for days and days and days if you really want to. Insta Maui Matt asks, which Black Rabbit strap do you use, single or double? It depends. I have both. If I'm going to carry the 302.8 for an entire football game, which I do a lot, I would use the double because then it spreads the weight over both shoulders. If I'm just going to carry a 7200 with an A1 as a second body at a football game, I would use a single strap. But really it's a matter of, one's a little more bulky, but really, honestly, what's better for your back is to use the double, even if you're only hanging one camera on one side of it. But sometimes for travel, it takes a lot less space just to use a single. What frame rate are you using to shoot sports action on the A9 III? Well, I can use, typically in video, I'm using 120 frames a second. Why wouldn't I? It's great. 60 frames per second is good too. But Just in case this question was about stills, this answer might surprise you. I'm shooting 30 frames a second with the A9 III for sports stills. I don't go even beyond it. 60 frames per second is just too much, and it's just too much deleting. So hope that answers that question.
When I got serious about creating my YouTube studio, I knew I needed a solution for LED lighting. Westcott's L60Bs are fantastic and are the perfect blend of power, control, and price point.
David Ballering is a good friend of mine, and he is asking about heat waves and how to battle them in the hotter months, shooting football, soccer, stuff like that. Heat waves are a problem, and the longer the focal length of the lens is, the worse they're going to be. So by default, even a 200 to 600 lens is going to do worse with heat waves than a 300 2.8, because the 300 is like half the focal length of the 600. A 300 2.8 is going to do a little bit better than a 400 2.8, believe it or not, because it's a shorter focal length. But typically what's good to remember is that a lot of people love to kneel or even lay down in the field and shoot. And that's a good thing to do. It certainly makes the players look better and bigger and whatever. But you're looking through more heat when you're kneeling. And if you're laying on the ground, you're really in trouble with heat waves. So the first thing you can do to battle heat waves is stand up and shoot at like your eye level. That's number one. Number two is use a shorter focal length lens if you have a choice and if you can. And number three is realize that the heat is literally generated within the worst of it is about 3 or 4 feet off the ground. And then there's another area that goes up to about 7 feet. So the other thing is if it's so bad and you can't really shoot at all, just go up in the stands and shoot from the bleachers down. You'll be looking over the heat that way. Jason Zeller asks, I've been using the A7 III for sports for the last 3 years. It's been a great camera. I'd like to upgrade to an A7 IV. Does that make sense? And the answer is yes, it definitely does. The A7 III is a fantastic camera. It's a great entry-level drug into Sony for sure. But the sensor in it is old, and the A7 IV sensor is so much better and a larger megapixel. So at 33 megapixel versus 24, when you punch in, especially shooting sports, it makes a whole lot more sense. The other thing is the A7 IV is going to be much, much better in low light situations than the A7 III, even though the A7 III does a great job in low light. It really does, but the A7 IV is better on literally all accounts. And then if you do any video at all, the A7 III does not have 10-bit color option as an option, and the A7 IV does. So if you're shooting even a little bit of video, it makes sense to go to A7 IV for sure. Bill Ashton asks, does the FX6 have a clean 4K HDMI out? Yes, it does. You have to go in and change, there's a setting in the menu called HDMI information or info. You have to turn that off, and then you'll get a clean out from that HDMI. Joe Thompson asks, can you ask Sony to make a Mark II version of the 100-400 GM? Sony, would you make Joe a new version, a version 2 of the 100-400 GM lens, please? Thank you. Boris Muir asks, how does the A7C and the 24-50 feel in the hand? Is it too front heavy? The answer is no, I think it feels good. However, I went and spent the extra money to buy the A7CR grip. And this little guy makes all the difference in the world. So I really love the grip on the A7C Mark II, but unfortunately it doesn't come with a grip like the A7CR does. So you just have to buy it as an accessory. It's about 150 bucks or so. And this makes all the difference. And you can still get to the battery. It's got this weird flip down thing, and you can get a battery out really quick. So not to worry about that. And by the way, for non-sports photography, the A7C Mark II, still my favorite camera on the planet. It is awesome. Okay, Scott W. says, my A6400 struggles in low light with the older 7200 f4G lens. Would the newer f4G2 lens improve this problem, or should I switch to A7 IV? Yeah, the problem is mostly the camera. The A6400 is really an antiquated sensor at this point. The A6700 sensor would be way better, But even better still would be to go the A7 IV and get the full frame. And then you get all the low light stuff, and you get much better autofocus accuracy and things like that. Now the problem is if you're shooting sports or birds in flight, you're going to go from a 300 millimeter field of view to 200 millimeter. So there's that to think about as well. But yeah. Here's a question. If you had to choose between the A1 and the A9 III, which one would you choose? It would be the A1, definitely, because it does all photography, not just a type of photography. I don't just shoot sports, so if I had to choose between them, I love doing landscape and portrait work, and that I love having a larger file for that. Also, 30 frames a second is plenty fast. I'm not shooting more than that on my A9 IIIs right now. So I'd give up the pre-capture part of the A9 III, which is pretty amazing, but I think the larger file is still would outweigh. If I had to choose, I'd still pick the Alpha 1. Now this last question's a little involved, so I'm gonna have to read it to you. It's kind of funny. I would like to know how I can turn my love for photography into some cash, as I've invested almost $200K in photography in the last 5 years, and I need help as I've never made a penny with it. But I love all aspects of photography. I love sports, landscape, wildlife, portrait. I need someone to explain to me how to start charging and booking clients before my wife leaves me. She said she could fly to the moon before I'd ever get my money back. Who knew cameras and lenses and lighting could be so expensive? Help, help, help. I need your help. I love all your work. There's an organization called Alcoholics Anonymous that is in every country in the world. I think you're from the UK. I would just recommend drinking heavily and then joining AA and using the 12-step program to kind of throttle back your extensive purchases in photography. And if you live anywhere near Knoxville, Tennessee, let me know and I'll go with you, because my name is Pat and I'm also a gear addict. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you next time when we answer more questions from YouTube. Have a great one.